Thank you all for coming. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. The slide did not make it, but the University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet. We pay our respects to their ancestors, the descendants who continue to, and their descendants who continue to provide cultural and spiritual connections to country, to recognize their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. Okay, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Michal Belcik. So Michal did his undergraduate and master's in forestry at the Warsaw University of Life Sciences in Poland, and then he did his PhD at the Institute of Nature Conservation, which is part of the Polish Academy of Sciences. And his thesis was on the factors affecting the occurrence of birds in forest patches. And the talk today will be extending that to how their social information among the birds, not people, influences their responses to habitat. And I think you are going to find a very captive audience because there are a lot of birders here. So welcome. Thank you. Oh, and real quick, you're visiting for how long?
For like 5 months, so I will be staying up until like the mid-December.
Great. So
I'm in room 507 in case like anyone would like to drop by for a chat or something.
yes, absolutely. So please welcome Michal.
Okay. So as already mentioned, my topic is also part of my PhD thesis, so I would like to present to you parts of my project. And I think like the best place to start like my story is to this way. Oh, sorry. No, is to talk to mention a few words about how we can measure biodiversity, basically because that might come in handy. Like so, like when we think of I think a little bit of malfunction, but will be there. No.
Is it temporal?
No. No, it's not working. Sorry, it was working when we find it. Oh no, not so. Okay, thank you. So, like when we talk about the biodiversity, like the most commonly used metric is the taxonomic diversity, which is like simply the number of species we have like within a given area. But there are other biodiversity metrics that are used. One of them being the functional diversity, which tells us about the volume and functional traits within the communities. And the other metric that is quite commonly used nowadays is phylogenetic diversity, which is like the diversity of evolutionary history within a certain community. Like think of it like as a part of the life tree that like is represented by the species that can be found within a certain area. But it's forward. Thank you. It's like biodiversity like within a certain area depends on a number of factors. One of them being like the physical properties of the landscape itself. And those properties quite often are shaped by the habitat fragmentation, which as we know is a division of the larger habitat patterns into smaller, like more isolated ones. But like the physical properties of the landscape are by far not the only factors that can influence biodiversity. One of the others can be social information. And what is that social information? Like I use the word social information, but it's also referred to as the social public information. So the social information is basically all of traces of presence of animals within a place, or as well as the physical presence itself. So think of the things like calls, like olfactory cues, like chemical cues left in the environment, like the tracks, feces the animals leave behind, fur, feathers, like the carcass of a prey left behind by the predator, or something like this. And it is important to know that that information can be perceived and like or received in a number of ways, depending on the recipient. So depending on the species. So, and in that way, it can then alter like the behavior of the recipient, or even it can alter its distribution within a landscape, the way that in some species like are more likely to occur. Like for example, traces of presence of a predator, they can create a landscape of fear effect. On the other hand, like the traces of presence of conspecifics can be perceived as an indication of a high quality habitat patch, and therefore attracts the individuals from the same species. Now, if we combine all of that together, the aim of our project was to see how the habitat fragmentation, measured with the habitat isolation and habitat patch size, influenced the biodiversity of bird species within forest patches of rural Poland, southern part of Poland, and that biodiversity was measured in the taxonomic diversity and phylogenetic diversity and functional diversity, as we mentioned before, and how those traces of presence, in this case the bird calls, how they can modify that relationship between the habitat fragmentation and biodiversity. So, to do that, we have selected 150 forest patches located in the southern part of Poland. And on the next slide, you will see, and before you will see like how they look like. There are some questions we have asked. So, we asked is there a difference between responses of biodiversity to fragmentation metrics? The next question was there a difference in was there any way in which social information influenced biodiversity metrics, in those patches? Like that was on the next one. And the last question was kind of combining both of those together. It's like, as I mentioned, how can that different types of social information modify that effect of forest fragmentation on avian biodiversity? So for that, we set up our experimental design when we had selected 150 forest patches. This is like a kind of a typical landscape. Like the photo was taken exactly from the landscape, from our research area. This is those forest patches of a varying degree located in a hilly region, rural region of Poland. And in there, the project took 3 years. So in the first year, in those 150 forests, from the start of April to the end of May, we have just basically sent people to survey those forests and to assess the biodiversity of avian biodiversity in those forests. In the second year of the project, and before we did our service, we then divided our 150 forests into 5 groups. The first one was with, and on each one of those groups, we had a different type of background. So we had songs of the song thrush, we had songs of the goshawk, mixed songs of song thrush and goshawk. We had procedural control, and we have forests with no broadcast whatsoever. Then in the same year, just immediately after the experiment was done, we once again performed field service on all of those 150 forest patches. And the year after that, we once again performed field surveys to see whether there was any changes, perhaps maybe any effects of the experiment that still lasted within the landscape. So, speaking a little bit more about how what we broadcasted. So, we had first of all, we had a voices of a song thrush. That's a little far over here, and we classified it, as I mentioned, every part of that, that information, the bird calls, how they can be perceived it can vary within different species. So we have assumed that we will have some sorts of information that we'll call the positive, some will be negative, and some will classify it as mixed. So as a positive, we actually played for a whole day, for those 2 weeks, we played the songs of the song thrush, because it's it's a migratory passerine bird. It's mostly like associated with forest patches. So therefore, our logic was it might serve as a good indicator of a good forest patch quality. And our preliminary data suggested that its abundance was positively correlated with abundance of other forest species. As a negative information, we call it this way, we had a cause of opportunistic predator, Eurasian goshawk. And we had also like another category, which was a mixed social information, which was basically on the same playback we had like intertwined called calls of songthrush and Eurasian goshawk. We had another type of playback, which was like sounds from the background, like sounds of the wind, moving trees, and so on and so on. And the last group was a control with no playback whatsoever played within those patches. And from there, we have after we performed our experiment and after we collected all of our observation from the field surveys, we have calculated some biodiversity metrics. So you will see that there was like, first of all, we have, I need to mention that we have calculated them for both all of the bird species we've seen and for like a subset of forest specialists that we have derived from all of our species. So we had like taxonomic diversity, we had phylogenetic diversity, which was for that we used the mean nearest taxon distance. We had functional diversity, for which we had functional richness. We had like a Jaccard index, a species dissimilarity index, which tells you about like the species turnover within like consecutive years, like the species will be changed. Like the species composition changes within years. We wanted to see how big of like a stir of a movement the sounds we broadcast they produce within those forest patches. And we had like we used the general we used the GAMS, and for 2017 we used only the raw values of metrics, and for the 2 years we used the difference between the metrics of a given year and 2017 to better represent like the pure effects of the experiment. And like getting to the results, like some of those are already published, some of those are like already in the pipeline, as we may call it, like already in the works. And the first result I would like to show you, that will be on the first graph that I'll show, is like the thank you. Yeah, that's how like because as you remember, like one of the first questions we asked is what was the difference in responses between biodiversity metrics to forest fragmentation? And we see that like for the taxonomic, on the top two charts, we have taxonomic diversity for both all species and forest specialists. And you can see that that diversity grew within as long it was positively correlated with the size of a forest patch, but only up to a point. And for the phylogenetic diversity, which you can see on the bottom two graphs, this metric basically like it represented the how many closely related species there are in the within a certain forest patch. So with the group of habitat of forest patches, there were more closely correlated species, but only up to a point. But getting to the next results, the results of the experiment itself. The way to read it is like on the three top charts, there are like results for all the species, and the bottom three there are like for forest specialists, and they are like for 2017, so year prior to the experiment, year of the experiment, and year after that. And like the biggest takeaway from that one is like the sounds of a songthrush really attracted quite a lot of species actually. And on the other hand, the sounds of the goshawk, they were a deterrent to other species. So, and you can see that on the blue lines, there are like those watermark the statistically significant results. And if we for the mixed social information, which was for the mixed broadcast, which was the broadcast of Goshawk and Sound Reference on the same broadcast, it worked. It's as it seems as the negative component to that broadcast was the strongest, more prevalent in the broadcast, because it worked in a very similar manner as negative information. As you can see on those graphs, both controls are represented in the same group. And if we look at the next set of graphs, which will be, this is the Jack index. As I remember, I mentioned it's what was the turnover of species between years, and we can see on the two things. First of all, we can see that this is the difference between 2017 and 2018, and this is from 2017 and 2019. We can see that first of all, once again, the positive social information, those songs of a song thrush, they resulted in more species coming. So there was a more bigger species turnover. On the other hand, the negative and mixed social information, the broadcast, had a stabilizing effect on the species community within those forest patches. And one other thing we can say is those results are statistically significant even after 1 year after the experiment. So that might indicate that some of the results of the broadcast we played still remain within the environment, and there's the experiment we performed kind of triggered some sort of ecological, kind of in the correct word on this one, but have some sort of a process of a long-lasting effect. And if you look at another set of graphs, there's here we see the taxonomic diversity, phylogenetic, and functional diversity in how the positive information influenced the relationship between all of the types of diversity and the forest patch area. And we can see that, for example, when you look at the forest patch area, there was actually it reversed to at least to some extent the trend of the effect of habitat patch. In case of phylogenetic diversity, it was also similar, at least also reversed the effect of habitat patch area, at least in the year of the experiment. And for the functional diversity, you will see that the graphs they look pretty different, from the 2017 and then from 2018 and 19. And for the results, I think the biggest takeaway I would like to take from that talk would be to summarize, in the habitat, those biodiversity metrics reacted in a different way to habitat fragmentation, and in that effect of habitat fragmentation by the biodiversity, it can be modified by the social information. So which indicates that there's it supports the evidence from the growing body of literature, just there is this is one of the factors that animals do take under consideration when making a decision where to settle, is the presence of heterospecifics and conspecifics. And if we would like to kind of order those diversity metrics from most reactive to least reactive, I'll say the taxonomic diversity reacted first, then followed by the phylogenetic diversity, and functional diversity, there were the least amount of statistically significant results. And our results being still statistically significant even 1 year after the experiment might suggest that those effects can possibly persist in the environment even 1 year after the experiment. And now it's for a little bit of a practical application, because you may ask then how can we utilize? There are some restoration projects that already use using bird broadcasts. I've seen some reviews on those ones. I think there are from the seabirds and those are spanning, as far as I remember, like from the 1990s even, and but there's still a discussion like about the long-term effects of using that broadcast in bird conservation, because some conservationists and researchers are like kind of pointing out that we still don't know the long-lasting effects. So in order to like implement this as a viable conservation strategy, we need to know more about like how it works basically. And we also, I would say, there's not much of there is not that large body of literature telling us about the effects of both those playbacks and habitat fragmentation on those on the individuals and populations. So that can also translate into how effective our conservation strategies might be. And I think like studies like this might like be providing us some answers to the questions like how viable the conservation strategies are. So well, from my part, that would be all. I would like to thank all of you for your attention, and I welcome any questions if there are any. Thank you. One more thing, sorry for forgotten. Thank all of my co-authors, my supervisors that were very helpful in the process of doing the project.
I'll get it off get the ball rolling here. Great project. How many of these forests did you visit?
Myself, all of them, but I wasn't the one doing the field surveys, but I was the one like we needed landscape data on that one, like the forest quality. And since I'm like a forester by like my education, and also worked briefly prior to moving to science or working forestry sector in Poland, I went to all of those like to assess the forest quality, to have like the habitat data. Plus, well, just like, but I wasn't the one doing like field service, because like we had like separate from that one. We needed kind of like to divide the workloads for it to like work smoothly.
Cool. All right. So most of these birds are residents.
Yeah.
So I was thinking that
there were some I mean like some of the actually like majority of those would be, now that I think I started like that was my first answer, the majority will be migratory. It's like the percentage like the percentage of which are migratory, of which are residents. I would have to like once again like the data giving you the first answer. But please continue.
yeah. So if you have all these patches and birds live a few years. So if you play positive sounds in one and negative sounds in the other, so you might move from one patch to the other. So it's kind of like when you do a multinomial regression, like it sums to one. So if one group does better, the other ones have to do worse.
Okay, so
unless you pull from outside your community.
To some extent, we pulled from outside of the community. There were also like for example, we draw to some degree we draw from the pool, like from the field specialists. There was like we did another analysis on that. I don't have a results like shown here, but we pulled some field specialists like into the forest. Like maybe not like specialists, but like more of like a generalist species, like those smaller, like more fragmented forests. And to answering questions like, well, those could, but on the other hand, like for example, we kind of broke the effect of the isolation. So meaning, at least to some extent, perhaps we have managed to attract birds that are just like that to come to the forest patches that would normally be overlooked by them, at least to some degree.
Yeah, I was thinking that would be especially true for migrants.
Yes, I mean, it's like, sure.
Because the residents are going to be in one of the
patches. Yes, there is of course like there is like a risk of them just like being basically habituation for the sound. If in case, like, for example, even if you would like to use it as like a long-term conservation strategy, I guess. But like for the migrants, it might be especially.
And then I was thinking, just as a follow-up, because if they're long-term surviving in the positive playback patches, is that due to the fact that they moved there from the surrounding ones and stayed, or due to the fact that they're surviving or having more, their fitness is different in those patches? So I was wondering if that's on the agenda to look at like survival or reproduction.
That would be very interesting, and that's like one of the I would say that's one of the biggest like roads to follow after that one. But well, we didn't have a scope for that. But yeah, that actually was raised many times, like by many researchers before. Like, and that's actually I think will be like the most obvious like step afterwards. Basically, you just look at the fitness and how it like translates into the offspring and so on. But that would require like even more like project of a, I would say, of a even broader scale and even bigger and more expensive.
Thank you.
So.
Oh, thanks. Oh yeah, thanks for a very interesting talk. So were you saying, those graphs with the different times, were there different times with the introduction of the call of the passerine bird, or did you not show that result?
Once again, which graph do you have?
I had like 2017, 2018, 2019.
Yes, those were the years of the project. So,
but in each of the years, did you introduce like a treatment of?
No, only in 2018 there was like, if you could please go back to that graph that showed like the general outline of the study. Yeah, like even before that.
I was just a bit confused of when you introduced.
Of course, yes.
Yeah,
just like
song of the goshawk.
Oh yeah, this one. So it was like they all were introduced simultaneously in 2018, and from the broadcast lasted for the 2 last weeks of March of 2018. So like in the same day, they're all like were introduced, and they were played for like the same amount of time. Played, of course, in case of those patches where there were like some broadcasts, like anything to play at all.
Okay. Yeah. No, I get it now. So, and also, so do you suggest then, for like if you're doing forest restoration, to encourage other forest birds to come into your patch to play a call of a forest dependent bird, and then how can you guarantee that habitat is good enough to support it in the long term? I mean, also, what about just the effects of like that could have on that bird being picked off by some predator because it's moving across an open space, and how did you get like animal ethics approval to do something like that?
Well, first of all, like okay, so answering like the first thing is that I'm not saying that necessarily needs to be like the magical solution like for conservation, but there is a discussion, there are projects that are already doing that. Like there might maybe not like in case of a forest birds, and there's like what I've seen the project doing that on seabirds. Like we're trying like putting decoys of birds and like trying to broadcast calls, and then we're trying like to use it as a strategy. And some of those projects were successful, but there are concerns like yours basically, and like I was viewing my research mostly as a means of delivering, perhaps like maybe adding some to the answer, whether we should be using it at all. Not suggesting okay, this is what we should be using, but more like in case if we'll be thinking of using it, like this, like we've tried something like this, and this is what we found out.
Yeah.
So that would be my answer to your question. I would say basically, it's like, and in case of like species like birds dying, like basically from moving like from some side to side. Well, I guess you may say the odds of that like are non-zero. So there is a possibility of that. On the other hand, like I think like but I think those. I don't think like we have like significantly increased the mortality. Although like there could be like another study like that would be one of the follow-ups as well. It's like because I have also seen like very few, if any, studies on like what is like the negative of the broadcast in terms of the increased mortality.
Yeah.
So I mean, it could be like a good follow-up from there, definitely.
Sure.
Oh,
Okay.
I was just trying to follow up on I mean, it's an obvious thing to look at the fitness when you do
Yes.
that, right? I know like Poland has a lot of nest boxes, and they do a lot of nest box studies annually, right? Would it be like easy and cost effective to look at like chick mortality?
I mean, of course, that depends how you define easy and cost effective, but similar studies have been made, like even like by basically my supervisor was kind of a bit of a mastermind behind the project, and he did like similar study in a very like area very close to our research area around Krakow in Poland. He was doing that on a number of species. And it turned out, as far as I remember, that for some species it increased the fitness. But of course, like that was looking only on 2 or 3, I don't remember so exactly right now, species. So basically, it would need like a separate study, like a study like with a greater scope and magnitude to assess that. No, so.
This is a fascinating study, and I love the focus on the diversity on the whole. But I can't help but wonder, since you sort of referenced earlier how different species might respond differently to specific calls of different species. Did you try actually isolating the responses of the 2 species you played? I'm thinking less of the goshawk and more of the song thrush, because they're probably more common in the landscape.
Short answer, yes. Like for goshawk we didn't, but for song thrush we actually, when we performed the field service, we specifically focus on like also like apart from like assessing the whole like the range of birds being there, trying like to mark down like to whatever like best accuracy we could, like every individual song thrush, and we did like a similar analysis only for a song thrush, and basically it turned out like in a very similar manner. So it's like, yeah, it reacted. Like, and actually, we're working on a paper right now. It's like a kind of revised, and so yes, we did. We tried that as one, as like a focal species of like a whole project.
A question from Martine in the chat. Really fascinating. I'd love to know more about the projects that are using call playback to augment restoration.
Like, I'm not. On that one, I'll have to admit that like I haven't looked very mostly like on the general outlines of those projects. Like I haven't like looked very much into like each one of them. So I know that there are like projects like spanning from, as I mentioned, from 1990s. Like they were on the what I found were from the seabirds. There's a great paper summarizing them. Right, sorry, it's like for now it's like slipped my mind, but I read it only yesterday. Very to refresh it. Sorry, it's kind of like it's one of the situations. But it's just like those projects like were from the mostly northern hemisphere, but some of those actually, as far as I remember, were from Australia and New Zealand as well. And they used for example, one of those I think was on the offense. There was some on terns, I think, but it was like they used a mixture of difficult like attracting factors, like some of them being the device, some of them being like the broadcasting itself, some of them being like two of those and combined together into one project. But for now on, I mean, there are some good reviews on those projects, and they kind of. I believe this one, unfortunately.
I have one more. Do you think the goshawks would be attracted to other goshawk, or they territorial, and maybe they avoid the other ones, and so like, oh, maybe you just know, were the negative playback treatment, did it have more actual ghost shocks coming in?
No,
No,
it didn't. As far as I remember, the data it was like. No, in terms of gosh, like the effect wasn't that strong. I think like the territoriality plays the part. Yes, like basically it might be like, oh, there's one, so there's like competition. So it's like I'll just move somewhere else. I'll just like stay wherever I'm staying, so it's like not moving at all.
I was just going to say goshawks would be incredibly territorial. Their bird eaters, they're huge. They need 200 hectares each. So some of these, most of these batches are a tiny fraction of their territory. So you're exactly right. If you were a goshawk, you would keep away from other goshawks. In fact, there's great papers about goshawks and owls and stuff. They just kill each other. In Europe, there's about 10 species of owl, and there's just into predators killing each other, largely about prey and territoriality.
so then do you think that in this treatment, even though the smaller birds would perceive more risk in reality because they're territorial and they hear that, they're gonna be like, I'm gonna stay away from that one patch for a little while. There's less risk.
All depends also how many floaters are in the system. Because actually, to your point about the first question about are they migrants or are they residents? And people think, well, how would residents take up a territory and they live there generally for the rest of their lives? So why would they move? But in fact, it's deceptive. A lot of these populations, there are a whole heap of floaters that are just hanging around, waiting for territory to be vacated, and they're the ones that we push into better patches. A great experiment was done in about 1915, talking about ethics approvals, where somebody wiped out, took a 200-hectare American forest, and they killed every woodpecker. And next year, all the woodpeckers were back in the same numbers, which basically shows you that it can be quite deceptive. You tend to think of the world, here's magpies, here's magpie larks, here's lily wagtails, the world's right over the territories. But in fact, there's a whole heap of these other things, birds that are 2 or 3 years old, so they will pull in, and they're very flexible about when they turn up to. So I suppose there's multiple classes, and there's also partial migrants in these systems as well, aren't they? Things like song thrushes, I think, are partial migrants. So it's pretty messy between the migrants. It's not just here's a migrant, here's a resident. There's a heap of things to intersect in terms of their life history movement. But is it a concept? I think the biggest question is, could this be a conservation measure? The only thing I could possibly imagine is when you have declining woodland birds, is it worth concentrating them? Like the birds that I'm looking at in black-chinned honeyeaters, there might be 50 across 1 million hectares. And I heard 2 birds last week, single males calling, and they were calling and calling, and there's no other bird. Is it actually worth trying to pull them all together? So
To address the allele effect.
the allele effects issue, and is that the biggest problem? Or are you just concentrating them so that they're all going to die faster? Is it especially in a country where catastrophes like wildfire are one of the biggest effects? So I think it's from a conservation perspective, can this be useful in Australia? It's hard to know. It depends on the system and how many risks you're willing to take with a declining woodland bird.
Right, I could imagine that managing the species is difficult. For example, let's say you're gonna prioritize managing invasive predators in a few patches.
Yeah.
You're like, well, can we at least get some of these threatened birds in the patch?
Yeah.
And then, let's lure them in with some calls. And then we're gonna focus our management on supplemental feeding and invasive predators at the patches that we can actually manage, instead of building a fence. I mean, to keep them in there.
Good idea.
Yeah, there's different applications in the amphibian world as well. There's been some experimentation in the car.
Yeah, I did that. Yes, we kind of like because that was my PhD project, but as a doctoral study, I did something like to some degree similar with amphibians. When basically I tried to lure some of the amphibian species into artificially created ponds, and it worked, but not for the species I broadcast. So, like the ones I've played for, I was hoping for like they were not to be seen. Well, there were others that were like coming in droves, I was like, okay, well, sure, like there's some like heterospecific attraction, and in is a case of somebody who like already documented, like in common use, for example, in Europe. So there are like papers on that one, but it was interesting. So, well, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing for me about this work is that it seems to embolden animals to cross a gap that they might not have crossed otherwise. But clearly, there's many cases in your situation where species were there, and those patches were some of those patches that were unoccupied had the resources required for a species to persist there. Given you saw that ongoing effect, but they were unwilling to make the journey to get there. But clearly, you emboldened them to do so, and I think that's true of amphibians as well. So you could hasten that colonisation process, which would otherwise be quite slow.
Basically, kind of like you help with the social information, you can help to overcome like the effect of the low connectivity between patches. Like, and one of my inspirations, like for the project, amphibian project I did was like I read a paper in the US about the urban amphibians, and in case like they came to the conclusion that there were some patches that were actually very viable habitat patches for amphibians, but the problem was like there is a problem of connectivity. Basically, they were kind of like not properly kind of like the like animal like amphibians didn't know that the patches how they existed basically, and like it was suggested that in this case you can basically kind of like encourage amphibians to move to the patches that might be like beneficial to them. Of course, there is a question of where that low connectivity comes from, because like there are like of course there's like a significant risk of like creating some sort of ecological trap, making like for example amphibians like crossing roads or something like this. Of course, there are like things like a lot of like hurdles along the road to be considered in this one.
Yeah, there's also the media loved this story about playing underwater noise on coral reefs to attract fish to previously dead reefs, and that it worked at creating new communities on previously fished out or dead reefs. And then other people were like, yeah, but the fish are going to be attracted by the sound and show up expecting to be able to eat some coral and fish and not. But then they're like, well, they're still hanging out a year later. So they found something to eat. And so I think the exact same questions about attracting animals to patches. What happens once they get, like, we can do that part's of it. But what happens when they get there? And also, what are they eating? And how are they dividing up these resources? And the carrying capacity hasn't changed. So how are there more animals now? It's like the mechanisms that go on to make that higher diversity happen that are, I think, very interesting too. Not just in your system, but in amphibians, reefs. There's a lot of examples. I've been thinking about examples myself. Salt licks? No, I want to play lions and tigers in the jungle. We're good? Any last questions online? Okay. All right. Should we say thank you very much? That was really great.